Welcome back, y'all. I'm excited to have a conversation with a fellow who hasn't been here in far too long, but we are remedying that this evening, and the reason is because his output continues apace. You know, sometimes you have a focus for many years that is primary in your field of view, and then you move it slightly aside in order to take on many more areas of interest and areas to create and achieve. And my guest this evening, including this book, which we're on the wide so you can't quite see it, but we'll show it in just a moment, is his latest, the very latest published, which is a murder mystery, as he is very fond of, and one that is not in an earlier series but is only part of his creative output, including audiobooks and, of course, continuing to play the beautiful four-stringed instrument known as the violin, which he's been so very kind to bring along with him this evening. This is author, musician, and all-around fantastic Utahn, Gerald Elias. How are you, sir?
Great, and thank you for that introduction.
It's all so true, is it not?
I deserve it.
Absolutely you do.
Well, thank you.
I always feel as though I'm very fortunate to be able to reach out to an artistic community here in Utah, specifically in Salt Lake City, that is so rich, so varied, and it's just been far too long. So welcome back.
Thank you, Terry. It has been a long time.
It has been a long time, and I've seen a few of your publishing announcements go by, and I've been remiss in inviting you back. So I'm excited that we're sitting here in the only moment that really matters, which is the present moment.
Absolutely.
And for folks who may not be familiar with you, with your background and all of the things that have brought you to this present moment, talk a little bit about the variety of activities that you've enjoyed over the years.
Well, for most of my professional career, I've been a working musician. First in the Boston Symphony and then as associate concerto of the Utah Symphony. Since I left the orchestra in 2011, I've continued to do a lot of concerts, still playing with the Boston Symphony at their summer music festival at Tanglewood. But starting about 10 years ago, entering the mix were some books that I started writing, specifically a series of murder mysteries that take place in the dark corners of the world of classical music. So that got me off on a new tangent, and since then it's kind of been a balancing act between the two.
Talk a little bit about your, is it possible to say a slight alter ego in your earlier works of fiction, or
absolutely. Yeah, he's sort of my poltergeist in a way. The main character in all the books is a blind, over-the-hill, curmudgeonly violin teacher named Daniel Jacobus, who also happens to be an incredible amateur sleuth, and he's the one who solves all these murder mysteries in the world of classical music. And he gets to say the things that polite society doesn't permit me to say.
Of course, of course. A sense of propriety is surely developed over the years of being in such an august company as being a member of a symphony orchestra.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in fact, the most recent book that I published is called Symphonies and Scorpions, and that's my first nonfiction book, and it's about how an orchestra, in this case the Boston Symphony, travels internationally. And it's set against the backdrop of a historic tour that I was on in 1979 to China, which was really groundbreaking because it was the first American orchestra to go to China after the end of the Cultural Revolution. And then we went back again in 2014, and I wrote this book to kind of compare the experiences of the two tours and just the whole dynamic of what it's like to be a professional musician in such a context. You know.
I did get a little chuckle out of kind of analogizing to, you know, we hear about life on tour from pop music and those kinds of genres. So a fascinating thing to think about this lumbering herd of musicians and equipment, and in pop music you say, well, we'll backline it. So I'll just rent an amp when we get there, but it's a little bit different as a symphonic music.
Oh yeah, if you just imagine what it takes to schlep all these multi-million-dollar instruments,
No question.
Stradivarius violins and things like that, from one country to another, and make sure they're safe and don't get damaged, and some of the stories behind the scenes are almost as much fiction as the murder mysteries I write, except for the murders.
Right.
But I mean, some of it's really hard to believe, and there's really kind of not a very defined line between fiction and nonfiction in these books.
An interesting observation, and one that I find to be interesting as well, because any great work of fiction to truly be entertaining has to have recognizable elements, believability, as it were, that have to come from the essence of truth of storytelling, even if a particular instance or a little fact or an anecdote within a book isn't literally true, but it has to have something that makes you, that propels you forward to turn the next page.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why my most recent book, Spring Break, goes more in that direction, I think, than any of my previous ones, because it deals with, the major issue of the day in the U.S., which is sexual harassment. And I got the idea for the book a few years ago. I started writing it, and that's when the Salt Lake Tribune broke all those stories about sexual harassment and misconduct on college campuses. So for me, that was not only eye-opening, as it is for the general public, but in my profession, as a teacher, as a professor in a university, I've had first-hand knowledge of some of these young women who have undergone terrible mistreatment, and I felt that by writing Spring Break, it was a way to kind of bring that discussion to the world of fiction. So for me, that was a departure, in a way, from my previous books.
And again, a premise rooted in actual events, in as much as it was the news that helped along your development.
That was the
story.
inspiration, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, fiction, nonfiction, blending genres across a little bit. That being said, have you come out of Symphonies and Scorpions and that experience of that process, in which you're looking back in a more detail-oriented way to your earlier experience in the earliest days of openness of the vast country of China? Did writing that book have an impact on how you're viewing fiction? And you mentioned that you're working on 2 books currently that they're both works of fiction. Is that right?
Well, I'm working on a series of Western short stories that take place here in the wilderness of Utah, having experienced that firsthand as well, and also a children's book. So I'm trying to broaden my horizons and at the same time draw upon personal experience. So yes, in the sense that Symphonies and Scorpions makes me kind of reflect upon the past and kind of reinterpret it. Yeah, that certainly goes into the fiction. As well, we're talking about multidisciplinary type of writing. The 2 audiobooks that just came out this past year are kind of unique in that way, because an integral part of my mysteries is the music. And what we decided to do with these audiobooks is actually make the music part of the text, part of the narration. So I performed and recorded the music that's integral to the stories, and with the wonders of modern technology, we spent a day in the studio just weaving that music in and out of the reading. So it's kind of a unique product, and one that I'm really proud of.
Was that something that you had thought about before the opportunity to do the audiobook had come up, or was it the case of, well, you wrote every paragraph, every page in that book, and of course you spend much of your waking life with a violin in your hands. Was it presented by the publisher, by the audio publisher, that might be a possibility?
It actually had been a dream of mine all along, but the traditional audiobook publishers have a certain template for the way they make audiobooks. Sure. But I just by chance met this wonderful audiobook producer, Allison Larkin, and she said, you must have the music in these books. And boy, that was
had to be an exciting
moment for me. And I also have the honor of being the first living author whose books she's recorded. She's done a lot of Jane Austen and a lot of Dickens.
Interesting.
So I'm in really good company with those guys.
That's beautiful. And talk about the composing process. Was there a deadline that when you got the word that you were going to be able to do that? Were they wanting to put you into this template of production in a short time frame?
The production schedule I've learned from audiobooks is much quicker than traditional hardbound books, which takes a couple of years to go through several processes of editing and production. But with the audiobooks, we find the right narrator, and in this case it's a great narrator. He's really famous in this field, Jim Frangione. Sat down in the studio for a week, he read the book, got that all done. In a separate studio, I recorded the music, and then we took the audio files from the two and met together, and just with the recording engineer and with Allison, we just made magic together.
You were present when Jim did his recording?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't. But I did hear the files
Sure.
after he was finished. I didn't want to interfere with another pro.
Right.
You know, let him do his
course.
thing. And then once I heard that, I was able to, set the timing for all the music, and then went back into the studio.
I can only imagine that it must have been very freeing to be able to have that source material of the audio recording of the reading of the book to really work with in a way that sometimes the recording process is as you say, and it was segmented in this instance, and yet you were able to take that and really experience maybe in some ways the finished
once I
product.
heard Jim's reading of it, it really added a new dimension to the printed page, and that really gave me a lot more kind of creative inspiration to see how the music could fit into it. So,
and did it? I'm sure you listened to a fair amount of his work before the recording process, but was it a surprise in any way, because I'm sure you've had a voice in your head as you're writing all this time. I don't know if that's your voice narrating a particular page. Do you read out loud as you're writing on a daily or weekly or monthly basis?
No, I actually have an inner voice of the characters, but an audiobook, as what Jim explained to me, is different than theater. So what he tries to do is read the book as if he's reading it to you, from me to you. So rather than totally change his voice from one character to another, he very subtly modulates it so that you do get a sense of which character is which, but you also always know that it's Jim reading the book. And I think that really makes it very special and keeps the listener focused in on what's happening. Likewise, when we inserted the music into the narration, we didn't want it to bring the story to a halt. So there are just little hints of the music now and then, just enough to keep the reader the listener moving along with the story and adding to it rather than kind of giving a lesson.
Right, very much like a film score.
Yeah.
It's there, sometimes it's more noticeable, but I've always found that it's an interesting and fascinating exercise, if not an entertainment, to sit with a film, and a film that you love, you watched before, and then to view that film again and say, well, I'm going to pay attention to the score and see what that portion of the audio of an otherwise visual medium is doing for me in terms of consuming the story.
Yeah. Except in this case, the music actually provides clues to the mystery. So, yeah, we've got that layer also.
Look at that smile. That's a fellow who's having a fantastic time.
Yeah.
That is just great. What else is happening? And you're going to play us out in a couple of minutes with some accompaniment, and it's from Danse Macabre, is that right?
It's the title music.
Fantastic.
From Danse Macabre.
Before we get to that, talk about what you're up to now. What's exciting for you in 2018? As you mentioned before we came on air, you've had a very release-oriented 2017 with 4 major pieces of content coming out. What's happening now? Are you back to the woodshed?
Back to the woodshed, both with the writing and the music. I've got a couple of chamber music concerts coming up in January and February, featuring the music of Brahms, which I'm really looking forward to. That keeps me grounded in the music world. And then I'm also giving a series of presentations to a local book club in Salt Lake City. 7 different books, just 2 of my own, but various books. And so I'm keeping my foot in that part of the literary world. And just kind of revisiting some things that have not yet been published and starting to gather ideas for new books as well. So, you know, there's a lot of juggling going on.
A lot of exciting stuff, it sounds like.
We'll see what I can catch and what drops.
It always happens, right?
Yeah.
The creative phase is back on, it sounds like.
Oh, it's always on. It's always on.
That's fantastic. Any new genres are you thinking about?
Well, you know, someday it has been suggested to me that Daniel Jacobus would make a great character for a TV show or a film. So we're pursuing that a little bit, and we'll see what happens. So if any of you Sundance people out there are interested, just give me a call. Know where to reach me.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Final question that I forgot to ask, and that is, what is it about mystery, or the mystery as a format, that seems to be so endlessly fascinating and enjoyable for you?
It draws me, and it might be almost genetic, because when I have an older brother and sister, and when I learned to read, my brother had all the Andy Hardy, Hardy Brothers mysteries.
Yes.
And my sister had all the Nancy Drew mysteries. So like the first literature I ever read were mysteries, and somehow that got embedded in me.
The imprinting.
Imprinted.
It's the duck that thinks it's a pig.
Right. And all my life I've just enjoyed reading mysteries by many, many, many different authors. And when I started writing, it just seemed like the most natural genre for me. So,
do you reverse engineer, or do you kind of have a sense of unknowing that helps you drive the storytelling?
I usually start out with a basic structure of the story I want to tell. I have a beginning, middle, and end to it. But as I'm writing and I add characters and develop characters, different angles come in, I often change the ending 3, 4, 5 times before I really have a polished story. So in a way, it's a mystery to me as well.